Hey there everyone. Long time no see, huh? As I'm sure you can tell, I kinda fell off of the one progress update a month plan very quickly. The main reason this happened is that making these massive progress updates takes a lot of time and effort. Specifically, time and effort that could otherwise go towards working on the game. On top of that, my motivation to make them is rather low, as ever since the midweek update program started a year ago, progress updates have basically just been 20 minutes of me repeating stuff I've already talked about in the midweek updates, with maybe a minute or two worth of new material at the end. I do have a plan to resolve this issue, but I'll leave that for the end of the video. There's a pretty hefty amount of actual in-game material to talk about today. Let's begin by going to the same tutorial area we were in before, in order to showcase the major graphical differences that I've added since last time. As you can tell, the game looks quite a bit different than it used to. I decided to take the plunge and purchase a brand new shader pack, specifically Toonie Colors Pro 2, and use it to give the game a very stylized look. With cell shading, thick black outlines, and a halftone shader, the game now has a very distinct art style. A major upgrade, in my opinion, from the more realistic but also default Unity shaders used prior to this change. This has also led me to switch the shading path back from deferred to forwards. For most people, that doesn't really mean anything, so the short of it is that this means that the game's anti-aliasing will be a lot better than it used to be. For people who don't know what that means, the game's gonna look smoother. Some might wonder where exactly the inspiration for these new shaders came from. I'll get to that in just a little bit. Now let's move on to the new content, the new fighty place itself. Overall, I'd say that the level geometry is around 50% complete, not including any little detailing that I'm going to do later on down the line. The level's split into two primary sections, an interior inside of the mountain at the center, and an exterior where we are right now. We'll be visiting both of those in this video, but let's start off with some of the major landmarks of the outside area. Before we do that though, I'll just take this moment to mention the obvious. The fighty place has its own brand new music track now. Once again composed and arranged by S. Balding, this theme is the primary theme for the fighty place. It's possible that this song will change when in the interior or after defeating the boss, but those plans aren't anywhere near set in stone. Anyways, on to the level itself. Right now we're in the Sphere Friends emergency fallback camp in the fighty place. Now's probably the best time to mention that I've changed how the story will progress with Catboy's arrival. Instead of being launched to Sphere Friend Yellow's home in the mountains, Catboy will be launched directly into this camp, interrupting a training session that Sphere Friend Yellow was hosting. After a brief conversation, Sphere Friend Yellow will join Catboy on his adventure, and suggest that he travel through a portal to reach the tutorial area seen in the last progress update. This continues the trend of optional tutorials that don't force the player to do them that I started back in Cragwell Woods. On that note, Cragwell Woods' tutorial is also going to need a revamp soon due to some major platforming changes, which I'll touch on in just a moment. Directly outside of the fort, there's two main points of interest: the level's first effigy, and the lake of the fighty place. We'll be coming back to the effigy later on in the video, so let's just take a look at the lake for now. One major benefit of the new shaders is that water looks like, well, water now. With edge foam, depth coloring, and UV and vertex animations, the water looks much more natural while still maintaining a very cartoony appearance. This is also a good time to mention the first of those platforming changes. Catboy's swimming mechanics have been pretty heavily overhauled. His base move speed is drastically reduced from how it was back in Update 6, but in exchange his vertical speed's been increased a bit to compensate. However, his charging speed when holding down attack has remained the same as it was before, meaning that all the crazy huge dolphin jumps he was able to do before, he can still do now. Moving on to the next point of interest, let's head over to the abandoned Sphere Friend Fort in the other corner. Overrun by mutant shamrock vines that erupted from the mountains, the Sphere Friend Fort was abandoned by the remaining Sphere Friend soldiers. They had to flee so quickly that they weren't able to disengage the locks on their sausage shrine, leaving many of their war supplies sealed inside. Any explorer could manage to get their hands on the sausages and other goodies, as long as they were smart enough to break the lock. This is the site of the first puzzle of the Fantabuloso game, and it'll require some pretty clever thinking on the part of the player. If you want every sausage, you're gonna have to earn them. I'd also like to mention that the clogged tunnel that you can see here is also quite important. It's the non-ballistic way to travel between Cragwell Woods and the fighty place. However, it's been clogged up by the Shamrock vines. In order to reach Cragwell, Catboy will need to find some way to clear the path. Hopping over to the other side of the area, let's take a look at the Shamrock's fortress, which is in much better shape than the Sphere Friends. With a vaguely gothic architectural style, the Shamrocks have set up a strong encampment in the opposite corner of the fighty place. As puzzles are historically taboo in Shamrock military customs, the Shamrocks have taken a much more direct approach to protecting their treasure, hiding it on the Shamrock float ship. A stationary hovering vessel, the float ship is unreachable to all but the most agile of thieves. And that's ignoring the Shamrock army that's defending it. Similarly to the Sphere Friends, the Shamrocks also have a path leading to their own staging area that's within their fort. However, they have it sealed under lock and key, and the path can only be reopened via direct order from the Shamrock King himself, so Catboy won't be able to make it through there anytime soon. Perhaps later on in his adventure he'll be able to return, though. The last major landmark is the mountain itself. The exterior of the mountain is still very work in progress, so there's not a whole lot to say about it right now, but the interior of it is currently quite a bit more interesting. This is also a perfect time to show off the new slick level transition system I've implemented. Each level will have a different transition screen vignette as well, in order to add that extra special charm to the game. Here at the bottom of the mountain, the Sphere Friends have attempted to break through the wall in order to sneak into the mountain's interior directly. However, their makeshift pickaxes proved too weak to bust through the reinforced Shamrock walls. Good thing that explosive barrel is right there. In the actual game, Catboy will need to bring this barrel from the Shamrock Fort instead, but I just put it here for now in order to streamline this video a bit. As you saw, Catboy can now throw objects he's carrying around. This will have different effects depending on the object, ranging from exploding, to creating smoke screens, to stunning enemies, or to just hurting the thing it hits. As of right now, I don't even know what I'm going to do with this mechanic. Now, here's an interesting object. Keep this in mind and feel free to make a guess or two as to what it is. We'll be coming back to it in a moment. Moving on, the big room right here is where the Shamrocks have been keeping the dogs they've stolen from the northern reaches of Fantaria, as well as anybody they deem fit to imprison instead of killing outright. When Catboy approaches the giant door in the center of the room, something very special happens. A cutscene! I've decided to go with a living comic book styled panel-by-panel cutscene system, which I think fits the style of the game a lot better than real-time cutscenes. Plus, it's also just easier for me to do. I've also implemented sound effects in these cutscenes that change based on the panel, and I have framework in place to activate events after the cutscene. Like this one. As you can see, battle rooms are now re-implemented. Working off of a very dynamic spawning system I wrote myself, the room spawns enemies from given locations, playing animations at these locations if I want, while also managing things to make sure the player doesn't get completely overwhelmed. That's not so much an issue in this static spawning situation where only specific enemies spawn, but it's something that's going to be useful if I spawn a swarm of weaker enemies. If Catboy beats this series of enemies, the doors to the room will open and another event will trigger. In this case, a cutscene showing all of the dogs pouring out of the prison and the fella in the cage back there waking up. More on him in just a little bit. Now, unfortunately, this time around, Catboy wasn't able to pull through and the Shamrocks got the better of him. At least he has this nice little death animation, but that's not all. Remember that hand we passed earlier? That's a miniature checkpoint. Acting like half-featured effigies, these mini checkpoints allow Catboy to respawn at them when he dies. Unlike effigies, however, they're not hooked up to the effigy chamber, meaning you can't fast travel to or from them or level up using them. Basically, they exist to make tricky combat challenges less frustrating by not forcing the player to do a ton of busy work and backtracking just to get a second attempt. Now that we've seen the bulk of the level, let's zip back on over to the effigy from the beginning. You might notice the model looks much nicer than it did in Progress Update 7. The first thing I did after the Progress Update was improve the model to look less blobby and more like an actual, albeit amateur, sculpture. The exterior is not the only thing about it that's different though. Some fairly massive changes have occurred when it comes to the skill tree inside. In that, the skill tree doesn't exist anymore. In its place, well, it'll probably just be easier to show you guys. As you can see, the room itself has been drastically overhauled. In place of the 8 skill tree branches, there are now 7 statues, or perhaps more accurately, stat-Us. Each statue represents a different statistic that Catboy can level in order to increase his combat effectiveness. Standing on a statue's pedestal and pressing the Interact button lets Catboy see what its statistic is. Each stat can be leveled all the way up to 99, although the way their corresponding values scale varies on a stat-by-stat basis. Before we go through the stats one by one, I'd also like to take a moment to discuss this screen a little bit. When you go to increase your level, you can preview the corresponding stat change over there on the bottom left, and you can also see the SP cost on the bottom right. If you reach an SP cost greater than what you can afford, the SP cost goes red and you won't be able to actually level up. Also, now seems like a good time to mention that I've improved the text in a couple of ways. I've both created a new custom font, and I've also implemented Text Mesh Pro on all GUI elements. This has made a much sharper and more stylized look for the UI, tying in very well with the new 3D shaders. Enough technical talk though. Let's just take a look at all of the skills. First up is Fortitude. Just like in the old skill tree, Fortitude increases Catboy's resistance to knockback and staggering from his enemies. Obviously, with 99 upgrades instead of 8, each individual level will provide a much smaller boost than they did in the old tree. This per level value, however, will grow higher as Catboy increases the skill until hitting a soft cap, usually around level 40, where the increase per level drops down again. This applies to all of the skills, not just Fortitude. It's just, this is the first one, so I figured I'd mention it now. Also, Fortitude's color has been changed from yellow to orange in order to not conflict with the next skill, which is Friendliness, the representation of ammo. Once again, initial per level returns are rather low, but they'll grow larger as Catboy levels it up. I may have mentioned this before, but despite being themed after Sphere Friend Yellow, every ranged weapon will draw off of the same ammunition pool, consuming different amounts based on their power. An explosive weapon may consume 5 ammo instead of 1, for example. This is the main reason for the massive amounts of ammo Catboy will be able to obtain. Currently, I think it's at least 50 or 60 ammunition. Moving on, the last repeat skill from the old tree is Energization. This is the stamina equivalent, and like the last two, there's not really a whole lot new to say. The only things of note are that the segmentation of the stamina bar has now been removed, and Catboy's stamina regeneration rate has been greatly decreased. This change may be reverted, as I'm considering making all of Catboy's attacks consume stamina in a future update, instead of just certain attacks and dodges. We'll see what happens. Now we can get into the more interesting and new skills. Let's take these two at a time. The first pair I'll discuss are the melee stats, Smashitude and Nimbility. Those familiar with the Souls series should quickly recognize what these stats are. They govern Catboy's damage with the melee weapons of the game. Stronger, heavier weapons will primarily scale with Smashitude, while faster and lighter ones will be based on Nimbility. Different weapons will also scale partially with each individual stat. For example, Catboy's fists will scale evenly with both Smashitude and Nimbility. Lastly, we have the ranged stats, Aimfulness and Icorification. Once again, these are both differently scaling damage stats, this time governing Catboy's ranged weapons. Aimfulness will dictate the damage output of more mechanical, physically oriented ranged weapons, while Icorification will cover the damage output of more magically oriented ones. Overall, I feel like this new stat system is far more convenient and streamlined for the player. Despite this, I'm sure many of you have several questions that are also complaints. Where are the unique abilities? How do you upgrade your health now? What's happened to the entire general tree? Don't worry, the important parts of all of these will still be in. I'll get to how they're going to be implemented later on in the video. Before we move on to the new state of Collectibles, I'd like to take a moment to discuss a new feature of Effigies. Observant viewers will have noticed that there's actually now 3 Effigies in the stat room, as opposed to just 1. This is because Effigies will now serve as an in-level fast travel system. 3 Effigies, each with different poses and differently colored bases, will be found in the main sections of each level. Catboy can access any of these 3 directly from the Effigy chamber, letting him backtrack through levels much faster than he could otherwise. Currently, in sub-areas such as the mountain interior, there is not going to be any Effigies, but that could easily change later on in development. I feel like there's a good chance it will. Anyways, with all that out of the way, now seems like a good time to discuss the changes and additions to Collectibles, beginning with the brand new mini collectibles, the Crystal Teeth. Said by the Sphere Friends to be the teeth of a long-dead crystalline dragon, these shards are scattered around the fighting place. It'd take a lot of time and effort to discover any secrets that these artifacts may hold, but perhaps someone could do it. We'll get to that in just a little bit. Additionally, you likely noticed that in the Effigy chamber, SP counts are far, far, far higher than they were in the past. A single level costs more than the total number of SP that were originally available. This is because I've overhauled the SP rewards and the way SP works in order to fit with the new leveling system. Instead of before, where blood sausages and I think it was golden sausages were the only ways to gain SP, now every single collectible in the game will give SP, with the exact amount varying based on the collectible. Mini collectibles, like the crystal teeth, will give the least at only 10 SP each, while the sphere dogs will give the most at 750 each. Additionally, killing enemies will grant Catboy moderate amounts of SP, decreasing down to 0 as that enemy's bestiary entry is filled. This means that if a player is especially struggling, they can do a little bit of grinding to gain an extra edge, but they won't be able to nullify all challenge by grinding forever until they're obscenely overleveled. Furthermore, any bestiary learn rate upgrades will also increase the amount of SP you get per kill. Overall, if you fill out a bestiary entry, you'll get the same amount of SP total, you'll just get it faster. In addition to awarding SP, each collectible also has its own unique purpose. Let's talk about them one by one. Currently, none of this is implemented yet, so I'm not going to go super in-depth with it all. You'll have to wait until I actually implement it for me to explain things in full. It just makes more sense that way. First off, you remember the guy in the purple coat from the prison? He's not just any old human. Known only as the Researcher, he's a stranger who's very interested in the various magically charged baubles from the lands of Fantaria. In exchange for the mini collectibles of each level, the Researcher will give Catboy various artifacts to increase his combat ability. The basic idea of these artifacts is very similar to the Rings of the Souls series. Additionally, gathering every single mini collectible and giving them to the Researcher will unlock the Fantabuloso sublevel of the given area, featuring a heavy-duty platforming challenge that'll reward Catboy even further. For those who don't know what I'm referring to here, the Fantabuloso sublevels are basically going to be Super Mario Sunshine-inspired secret levels. More on them when I actually implement them. Moving on to the next collectible, golden sausages are where the meat of Catboy's upgrading will come from, pun intended. Catboy will be able to trade his golden sausages with Happy Crag in exchange for powerful new skills and abilities. Some of these will be new moves, like the Lanky Lunge. This is now being made an unlockable ability due to how insanely powerful and useful it is. But that's not all. This is where all the seemingly lost skills from the old skill tree will end up. However, similar to Fallout perks, many of these skills will now require Catboy to have a certain proficiency in a given stat. More on this in a future video. Blood sausages, though less diverse in what they upgrade, are going to be very powerful as well. Catboy will be able to trade them to Hungry Crag in exchange for a number of boosts. He can use them to increase his health, upgrade the strength of his weapons, or gain artifact slots. Finally, Sphere Dogs will no longer give Catboy a per-level reward, like if you collect all 5 Sphere Dogs in a level, you're not going to get a direct reward from that. Instead, each of the 3 hubs in the game will have a dog zoo, and gathering a Sphere Dog will send them to this dog zoo. When Catboy visits the dog zoo, he'll gain progressive rewards depending on how many Sphere Dogs he's turned in from the area. For those who have played Hollow Knight, the system would be extremely similar to the Grubfather system of that game, except a little more convenient since there will be dog zoos in each hub and pretty close to each level. Once again though, more on all of this in the coming weeks. Now that we're done with collectibles, I only have one major thing left to show you guys: the new platforming skills that Catboy has. Having spent some time playing 3D platformers like Super Mario 64 mods or a pretty cute little game called Poi, I realized that Catboy still felt really stiff and clumsy to control for being a 3D platformer character. I spent a while thinking about why, and I think I figured it out. He had barely any platforming abilities beyond the Lanky Lunge, Lofty Leap, and the Air Kick, none of which are all that exciting. As a result, I've decided to begin adding more dynamic abilities. These include a triple jump and a backflip jump as of right now. There will be more in the future though. Those who have played Mario games should be very familiar with both of these. The triple jump lets Catboy gain a ton of vertical height as long as he's able to chain 3 jumps in a row while moving forwards, and the backflip jump lets him gain a lot of vertical height that he normally could only get by doing a triple jump, or at least 2 parts of a triple jump. Overall, I feel like these changes will make Catboy's movement far more dynamic than it was before, and I'll be adding more stuff like diving and probably, I don't even know yet, I'll figure it out as I go, but there will be more platforming abilities in the future, so be excited for that. Now, since this video is already long enough, there's a bunch of other sort of more minor things I've added these past months that I haven't really touched on. Off the top of my head, some of these are sliding improvements, 3D grass effects, more accurate rammer physics, and better animations for Catboy, but overall, I think I've covered everything major in this video. You know, I'm gonna be honest with y'all, it's a massive pain to go through and try to recount months and months of work in a single video. So much of a pain, in fact, that I'm officially declaring this to be the final progress update video. Now, hold on. Before you unsubscribe and declare this channel and the game's development dead and abandon it entirely, listen to this. With progress updates done and finished and dead, I'm officially deciding to move my midweek updates over here into video form. This will let you guys here on YouTube get frequent and constant, though admittedly sometimes underwhelming, updates about the game's progress, while not compromising the blog's own update schedule the way progress updates have. Though this will mean slightly more work for me each week, I feel that it's the best way to keep all parts of this game's fanbase up to date on what's happening. Hell, I'm sure some of you guys here on YouTube thought the game's been dead and abandoned for months. Point is, here's what we're looking at for the future of the channel. I'll be posting weekly videos that are much smaller. Between confidential content and occasional poor work ethic, don't be surprised if many of these videos end up under the 5-minute mark. That's a little bit nice to have a bite-sized video though compared to these 20+ minute monstrosities I've been making in the past. Now, despite the fact that they'll be short, since I won't be trying to cram all of the info in a single video, it's also quite possible that I'll be able to go more in-depth on things that I'd otherwise gloss over in these larger videos. Now, due to the fact that this video is releasing very close to this upcoming Wednesday and said midweek update, I'm almost definitely not going to have enough new content done to make an entire video to show off for you guys this Wednesday. As a result, I'm officially announcing that the first video midweek updates release date will be Wednesday, July 26th, by midnight Central Time. As always, you can check out the description below to see all the links to the other aspects of development, the blog, the Discord, my Twitter, etc., etc. And, you know, feel free to like, subscribe, and it'll actually matter now because I'll actually be uploading videos consistently. I promise, for real, guys, I swear. But yeah, thank you guys for watching, and thank you guys for staying up to date with the game, and I will see you on the 26th. Adios.